Thank you so much. It's thanks, Mama, very much for inviting me. It's a huge pleasure to speak to people in this particular setting. For me, I'm an academic, I'm a historian, and so I'm very used to speaking to people in sort of an academic context. So if I say something which is assuming that you know something and you don't, just stop me and I'll stop and interpret myself. So please forgive me for any problems with my delivery and my difficulty in breaking out of the academic mode. My talk today is really related to the research I've been doing for the last 10 years or so, and also with a new project that I'm involved with at the moment. And it's on partition and the migrations and diasporas that flowed from the partition of the subcontinent in 1947. And in particular, my focus has been on the Bengal Delta, and I've looked for some time at these movements in the context of the Bengal Delta. I just want to say something about the structure of this paper before I begin. The first parts, the first half or two-thirds of the paper, are based on a book I recently completed, which is called The Spoils of Partition, which looks at the sort of medium to long-term consequences of partition for the social and political structures of the Bengal Delta. And so these parts of the papers are based on quite detailed research, and so that it will have a certain kind of quality. The last part of the paper is based on the project with which Shahzad is also involved, which is really looking at the implications of diaspora migration and trying to understand the conceptual problems of the ways in which diaspora migration can be thought about. On that, I'm on much more shaky ground. It's a subject I've only been looking at for the past year or so. So what I would like to do, with your permission, is possibly use the end part of the paper to open up and to ask you questions to help me and to correct me if you think my formulations are wrong. So it's a very uneven paper in terms of its quality and the sort of hardness of the research that underpins it, and I hope you'll forgive me for that and bear with what I'm trying to do, and I hope it will be of some interest to you all. There's one common theme which I think underpins the paper as a whole, and that is my claim that these massive migrations that accompanied partition and which have continued to flow in smaller but nevertheless significant ways since partition, that these migrations have fundamentally transformed the social and political structures of South Asia, and that they continue to be agents for change wherever migrants and diaspora communities are settled. So I'm seeing migration as a force for quite profound and far-reaching social changes. So that's what I'm going to try and communicate with this paper. Now, the way in which I see these migrations, or the context that framed these migrations, obviously violence was one important context that Mohammed has mentioned. But there was a sort of broader shift that took place in the subcontinent in 1947, and that was, if you like, the carving out of two nation states out of the old British Empire. Now, I'm going to try and suggest, that there's a fundamental shift when you have the idea of a nation, which is an ideal, it's an imagined ideal of what life will be like under conditions of popular sovereignty, when people are free. And when you try and convert that ideal into a real political, legal, and coercive structure, which is a state. And I think you can't really understand the massive scale of migrations unless you also bear in mind that this process took place in 1947, and we had the creation of these two nation states. Now, nation states always presume that some people are true nationals, true citizens, true denizens of the nation, and some people are not quite, don't really quite belong to the nation. And that creates feelings of minorityhood among certain people on both sides of the border. And it's in that context where you have popular sovereignty, where you have expectations of a free participation in the political process of a new state, which some people feel they may be denied, that these migrations begin to take place. So I'm arguing, there's a scholar called Aristide Zolberg who's talked about nation formation as sort of spur for, as a refugee generating process, and I think certainly in the case of South Asia, it has been a refugee generating process on a massive scale. The other thing about the South Asian partition is because it's important to bear in mind, I mean, we're all very familiar now, at least with the memories and images of the Holocaust that surrounded the South Asian partition. But this was the first partition of its kind ever. There have been subsequent ones that Muhammad referred to, most recently in Bosnia. But when India was partitioned, they had really no blueprint, they had no other model to which to turn to reflect to what might be the outcome of partitioning an empire in this way. And so one of the striking things about these migrations, which in retrospect seems astonishing, is that nobody actually anticipated them at all. Nobody thought that if you do this, if you divide a single political structure into two separate nation states, that people will feel the need to move. Nobody actually considered this problem. So much so that just in the first time that the Separation Council, which was in charge of actually organizing the partition, the first time the Separation Council referred to the possibility of refugees was 1 week before 15th August 1947. They don't even think about it before that, and that's despite the fact that already perhaps 500,000 refugees have come in from North Kali and are sitting in Calcutta. Already there are riots in Rawalpindi. Already there have been riots in Bihar. There have been riots in Gurgaon. There's been a whole huge amounts of displacement already. Yet somehow people think these are temporary phenomena and that people will eventually return home. So nobody planned for migration in the context of South Asia's partition. I'm going to go further. I mean, some people argue about South Asia's partition that basically the problem with the reason why it ended up in such a disastrous tragedy was because everybody was doing things in a great hurry. You know, Mountbatten came along and he kind of blew the whistle and said,